Hello YouTube, Proxy here, and Dark and Light's early access release sure was an interesting one. There was a lot of bugs, quite a lot of loading screen issues for some people, a lot of FPS and stutter issues for some as well, and general optimization problems. Now I played with MrPuppy and Kroy, who runs the Dark and Light community Discord. We got in some game time, we tested several things out, and we'll be using some of their footage as well as some of my own to make this video. But before I begin, I will remind you guys that this is an early access game. Game is still technically in development, however it has been delayed for 7 months or so since the early access was supposed to begin. And alongside this, there also seems to be a complete contradiction in Snail's statements. The Steam page clearly says this: the majority of content in early access version is finalized, and the players will be able to explore most of Dark and Light's world without limitations. Dark and Light's early access experience will be an authentic representation of the game in its final form, but we will be updating the game very regularly during the early access period to improve upon and refine and expand the game as it exists now. And supposedly Horsejoke had been kept on telling us that this 7 months delay was essentially to polish the game to an almost fully releasable state. However, the contradiction with this comes from the menu screen of the game once you get in, where the game says it's only 30% complete, and these statements don't really match up at all. Is the game in its final form, or almost in its final form, or is it still in early development and only 30% complete? And I honestly don't feel what we have currently right now in Dark and Light represents its final form in the slightest. That statement they made in their early access section of the Steam page just seems odd to say the least. I'm more inclined to believe that 30% comment, which is in fairly broken English on the DnL login screen. And once again, this just seems like yet another miscommunication in quotes between Snail USA and Snail China. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about servers. Now, to be fair to Snail, the servers did not crash too much. There was the odd crash here and there, but over and all for an early access game, it wasn't too bad. However, the official servers suffered from extremely bad response times and lag issues, and it was most certainly an issue with the official servers specifically, as the experience on private servers was much smoother and quite responsive. These official servers were also capped at 70 players, while the better performing private servers could hold up to 127 players. Another important thing to mention is that Snail said there would be PvP and PvE servers on launch. However, only official servers were PvP ones. Not a huge issue for myself, but I can see why some people would be upset by this. Enough about servers though, let's move on to character creation, which is pretty good. A lot of sliders, a lot of options, not quite on Black Desert Online's level, and very similar to Ark's, but with racial options. And just like Ark, you can make some pretty hideous monstrosities, which I'm not particularly fond of. Now, a lot of people have mixed opinions on graphics. Now, on the highest settings, this game is quite beautiful, very much like a lot of Unreal 4 games. But as soon as you delve slightly lower on the graphics quality, it takes a considerable dip. And Ark is kind of the same in this regard, but DnL is far worse for some reason. Generally, the optimization for me and Kroy wasn't so bad, but MrPuppy's issues despite running the game on a good CPU and a GTX 1070, the game was unplayable for him with terrible FPS drops and non-stop stuttering. And he's played many Unreal 4 games with me before and had no issues. Also, some people have reported some bizarre glowing artifact issues, which also rendered the game unplayable for them. Also, considering this is a role-playing game essentially, or supposed to be, the world didn't have much character or personality to it, and generally felt quite hollow and bland. The quest tutorial task system wasn't particularly interesting, it was literally like a kill or get list. Some parts of the quest line was easily bugged in several ways, but I do think it's good that you can completely outright ignore it. Gathering at the lowest levels is incredibly tedious, in fact it's downright annoying. However, if you stick with it and push through to get to the better tools and magic, it becomes much less of a chore. But it's still a chore. And on top of this, gathering with basic tools or your hands feels like you're not really connecting or hitting with what you are gathering, which is quite saddening. One of the bigger issues I have with this is the sheer amount of stuff you have to gather, and it takes quite a while to unlock the recipes in which you can actually use some of these materials. Not sure why, but gathering in Dark and Light was quite boring for me, whereas in Ark I don't mind it so much. Maybe this was because of the buggy official servers I was playing on initially, but generally gathering in Ark was much more fun because I could, pick up a few sticks and then go actually make something with that stuff. Whereas in Dark and Light you have to basically spam and punch trees for quite a while before you can actually create anything meaningful. In terms of crafting, I find the way you unlock recipes not so much fun. Honestly, I prefer how other survival games usually handle this. I found that Dark and Light's approach to this to be rather lackluster. The pacing of unlocking new recipes is generally all over the place, and could do with some restructuring to make it more streamlined and flow better. especially with the initial requirements requiring so much gathering to unlock basic things, especially things such as beds which you should be allowed to craft earlier, and results in you eating crap tons of these flowers basically not to die from sleep deprivation, which makes zero sense whatsoever. As for the survival elements, originally the game's survival elements were supposed to be more toned down and more like an RPG design. But this game has even more survival meters than the average survival game has. Hunger, thirst, stamina, focus, mana, heat and cold all play a part. Focus being a new DnL survival meter, which basically results in your death if you don't get enough sleep or eat enough flowers. And honestly, these meters run down exceptionally fast, especially considering you have more survival meters than you would in a usual survival game. Also, I don't think the lack of sleep should cause extreme health loss and eventually death, but rather give you some kind of stacking debuff. Combat is okay, a little simplistic initially, seems like with multiple staffs and weapons could certainly get more complex at higher levels. In terms of dodging, currently it's super buggy, graphically and one of the worst animated things in game for sure, and certainly could use some improvement. And while there are melee and ranged options, magic certainly is more dominant. Grouping features and the guild/house system serve its purpose, but nothing particularly noteworthy to talk about. Nothing really new or innovative here, it's just a functional system, but would be nice to see it expanded on in the future. Ark's radial menu definitely makes an appearance here and would have been nice to see something more dark and light inspired. In terms of sound, the music is great, ambient sounds are fine, however the fact some of Ark's sound files still remain, honestly those need replacing, as for an ex-Ark player it's pretty damn immersion crushing. Although this is a non-issue for those that have never played Ark before. Construction wise, pretty standard sandbox style building should feel very familiar to most survival gamers, easy enough for new players to pick up and get a decent amount of options visually. However, despite all these cool visual options, people still prefer to build boxes for bases, as it's the most efficient PvP defense currently. And it would be nice to see some solutions for that so we can see more diverse structures to be constructed. Towns, while they look pretty, lack a lot of NPC chatter or interaction, with only a few trader NPCs you can actually utilise. Considering towns were a substantial difference between this and other survival games, I honestly thought they might be more fleshed out, so I was quite disappointed when I saw what was actually on offer. I never got around to actually doing any taming during my first impression, and most of the other features are much further in game, as this is a first impression and not a full review. I haven't really got far enough in game to test or judge them. Things like the end game magics, polymorphing and end tier crafting or faction content. Though one last thing to mention about the game is the initial map screen before you load up into a game, which shows the one map that is currently available and a larger world map. And a while back, due to something Horsechoke let slip and knowing Snail's reputation to wanting to monetize game features, like they have done in all their previous games, I have been speculating on how they might do this for Dark and Light, and the way the map screen is sliced up, it certainly seems that selling off DLC map content might be their choice of direction to go in regard to this. If you have an optimistic outlook, maybe they will be giving all these map spaces for free, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if these future maps came with a price tag. So what's my overall opinion of Dark and Light? Well, in terms of survival games, I feel there's better options coming along or are already out there. The fact this game was made on an Ark client initially shows up here and there, which makes becoming immersed and involved in a Dark and Light world a little tricky for me personally. Ignoring the Ark elements completely though, the game itself is okay as a survival game, though the RPG features in my opinion are somewhat lacking. I didn't really get a sense of fear when outside in the nighttime other than it being pretty dark. Although I did see Kroy get mugged by a goblin on his livestream and it ran off with all his gear, which I did find quite funny. Still, the game is very buggy even for an early access game, and especially for one that got delayed due to the reasoning of wanting to make the game as polished and finalised as possible before the early access launch. So yeah, considering how long this game has actually been in development and how much time it was delayed for, I personally feel a little disappointed with the current version. For now, I'm refunding the game and I'll probably check it out later if it's on Steam deal or discounted. And that generally wraps up my first impression of Dark and Light. It is just a first impression of an early access game and not a full review, and hopefully they make some adjustments and improvements over the next few months. But in its current state, I just don't feel like it's worth my money or time. As for me, I'll most likely go back and check out what's new in Ren's pre-alpha, possibly check out Citadel a little more, and just keep waiting for Ashes of Creation Alpha to come around, while taking a peek at a few other titles. If you enjoyed my first impression or my other content, don't forget to like, subscribe and drop a comment below. And as always guys, thanks for watching.